Negotiations That Pay. Advice from real estate maverick Greg Pinio. Brought to you by Reach Returns. In Negotiations That Pay, successful entrepreneur and multimillionaire Greg Pinio provides you with insight from nearly 3 decades of successful real estate transactions, including the purchase of over 500 units in over 200 different buildings. In addition, he has conducted more than 500 brokerage negotiations. Greg gives you the edge in determining the key positions that unlock the deal. His win-win focus leaves his clients and yours with a positive perspective throughout the deal. Greg's negotiation techniques have earned millions of dollars for his students. Will you be next?
We are privy to a lot of speakers in the country talking about negotiation in all different settings, different emphasis. And we would like to take a different tact on the whole topic of negotiation than we're hearing anybody talking about out there. I would like to say it's the way I do things, the parts of negotiation, but actually I would like to underline the point even more and say I believe it's the only correct form of honest negotiation that will pay not only for the deal at the time, but where that deal creates a lifelong impression on people and therefore builds your business over a long period of time. So often we hear people talk about negotiation in this almost warring sort of framework, that it's me against you. You're wanting this, but I'm wanting this. And all these tidbits of how to negotiate to win your way, to win the argument, as it were. We come at this from an entirely different perspective. I believe that the best negotiations, whether it be in the field of acquisition and finance of real estate, or whether it be in the field of anything you're wanting in your life, are that negotiations whereby everybody gets exactly what they want, and likely the seller in this scenario doesn't really even know what you want as a buyer. All they know is they got everything they wanted. It's called rowing the boat the direction it's going. That our job as a negotiator is first and foremost to find out who it is that we're dealing with, what are their attitudes, their predispositions, their beliefs, their goals, their desires, their objectives, who they are as people, all of the nuances of their life. And then when we have a full and complete picture, we insert our proposition inside this blanket of who they are and what they want, so that they don't really even realize when it's all said and done that we, as investors, have gotten everything we want out of the transaction. All they know is that you are professional, unbelievably pleasant to work with, and that they got, as sellers, everything they could possibly want out of this deal. Again, a very different approach. And I'd like to have you walk with me through the topic of negotiation with an entirely different mindset. This isn't armed for battle. This is a higher level of negotiation where issues of awareness, sensitivity, hearing what's not being said, employing all sorts of your proactive feelers to where you move into the negotiation so sensitively and so carefully that nobody realizes you're even negotiating. So I would like to start today by discussing a bit of the history around this topic we call negotiations that pay. There's a lot of ways we can look at this topic of negotiation, but what I'm trying to get across to you is that one size doesn't fit all. As a real estate investor, you have very clear objectives. You know what you're trying to do, you've defined that for yourself, and you're out there looking for situations and opportunities that fit that objective. But understand that one size, one formula isn't going to work in all situations. It's there that the opportunity lies. If you sit with people and you allow them to add cream to the coffee. Oh, do you like your coffee with a little bit of caramel? Is your preference, decaf with a little bit of soy? Think about Starbucks. If the only thing they sold was black, hot coffee, would they get the market share that they have? They will give you that coffee in any way, shape, and form you want it, because their objective is to get you out the door with a $2.50 cup of coffee in your hand. They don't care how it looks or what color it is. You get to decide. And consequently, they're able to sell something hot and warm to just about everybody on planet Earth. Think if we applied that same strategy to our negotiations as real estate investors. That we walk in and we think of how can I customize my own objectives to meet everything you're telling me you want. It's amazing the results that might happen if we approach things a little bit more sensitively than this one-size-fits-all mentality. Part of what we do is, like so many other speakers in the real estate investment world, we go to different real estate seminars throughout the country. And what I see happening a lot are speakers talking about their latest flavor, the latest blue light special. And they're going to teach you how to negotiate pre-foreclosures. They're going to teach you how to negotiate a short sale. They're going to give you the latest shoe size and then tell you, go fit this shoe on this group of people. Here's the latest cookie cutter. And that cookie cutter is a size 12. And here's the way of making somebody who has a size 8 shoe, well, a size 12 is going to work. And if they have a size 14, well, tell them to curl their toes because this is the cookie cutter. And here's how to answer all the objections so that they will buy this size 12 cookie cutter. Ours is custom fit. There is no one tool that we employ in our negotiations. There is no one cookie cutter, no one formula. We are trying to handcraft a transaction to where we get everything we want as an investor, but that is never mentioned. That's so subtle. All the seller knows is that when it's all said and done, this shoe absolutely fits perfect. And that you have taken the time and energy and effort and you have the awareness to craft this transaction to meet every one of their objectives. Totally different than what we hear out there. It's a higher level of real estate education, by the way. I need to have an understanding of not just one tool out there. I need to have an understanding of every tool out there so that I can employ all available means to meet this objective of perfect, quote, persuasion. Way back in time, if you went back to the original phrase of that word persuasion, you would know that it meant agreement. That we had a state of, quote, persuasion. It was where we have agreement between all parties. And so we have a very warped version of that word today. Persuasion, we have these connotations of being manipulative, being leveraged, being, persuaded in a negative way. But our job as negotiators is to find that state of agreement where everybody feels good about what has just happened. And that does not happen by curling your toes and jamming them into a shoe that doesn't really work for you. We are going to handcraft our transaction so that we have perfect agreement between all parties. A question we get asked a lot at Reach Returns is surrounded around the idea that, is what you teach something that is cookie cutter? Is it something that we have all the forms where all you need to do is just fill in the blanks? And the simple answer to that question is absolutely not. The very nature of higher level negotiations is how custom they are. We will go through case studies and different negotiations later in this particular CD that you're listening to, where you will see there isn't a forum in the world that's going to have blanks enough to fit in some of the custom things that negotiation entailed. And everybody out there seems to be looking for the easy way. Like, just teach me one cookie cutter and give me the top 10 questions I have to ask in their order. And then when they say this, I say that. And when they say this, I say that. And at the end, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, go on to the next one. And find those people who can fit into a nice, neat, tidy form, and there you have your deal and you'll make $1 million. Well, guess what? That is a bunch of garbage. Custom negotiations require a high level of real estate fluency, knowledge in financing, knowledge in investing. And to think that we can skip that chapter and go to high-level negotiation is ridiculous. We have a full-on seminar, a full-day seminar we call Wisdom for Wealth, that is a requisite for our second-day seminar, Foundations for Freedom, which is nothing but finance squared. Then we have a full-on day on property management, a full-on day on all sorts of aspects of the real estate industry, because we take a full-on approach that to know all the tools in the real estate industry allows you to fluently and with confidence structure your negotiations. Very similar to a doctor who's got 16 years of schooling and decides to be incredibly specialized in one area of the body. Well, he didn't get specialized without an overall knowledge of the way all systems work. We need an overall knowledge of all the tools of negotiation, all the tools of real estate acquisition and finance, so that then when we meet with the seller, we are able to narrow our scope and customize our negotiation to absolutely and completely fit their needs like a glove. And it's there that the deals that we create will last for a lifetime. We take this topic of negotiation so seriously that I believe it is essential to go back, way back, to understand some of the roots of this sport we call negotiation, this art of rhetoric, as Aristotle would put it. Way back when, and if we were really to put a rough date on this, somewhere in the 450, 460, a gentleman by the name of Corax lived Sicily. Sicily was a Greek colony. This era had a very democratic system, and any of your arguments, any of the issues of the time were brought in front of a jury of your peers, citizens, 100 to 1,000 people in a jury, kind of a live you against the world. And the way things worked at that time was you'd bring your beef in front of this jury, and the winner would be exalted and revered, and the loser would have a severe penalty, sometimes hauled right out of the courtroom and stoned to death. So you needed to be on your persuasion game. And so this guy named Corax started studying who was winning and who was losing. He found that it wasn't necessarily the issues that were cut and dried. It was the way people presented their arguments in this court setting that determined winners and losers. And he coined this heading of this topic, the art of rhetoric. And he defined this word, persuasion, as this state of agreement, where the winner of this particular venue would have agreement with the jury. And he would essentially find that state of persuasion. What did that take? What were the winners doing? They were walking in with a high level of expertise, but exactly what was that expertise? Well, this baton got passed on to the learned people at the time, and the next one to really pick up on this and really study it was Aristotle, 466, Athens, Greece, a scholar, a sophist, a student of Plato. Aristotle taught some pretty heavyweights like Socrates and Cicero. And he came up with what he felt were some 3 basic elements that those people who were doing a great job were very aware of. And he underlined these 3 things: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos, defined, is the audience's impression of the speaker's character. So it's your audience, their impression of you. What are they looking at? Who are they seeing? What are they seeing when they look at you? Those people who are winning were in control of that. They were creating the impression that they wanted to create. Nothing was accidental. Pathos. This is where the speaker is very cognizant of the mind and the emotion of his audience. In other words, who are you talking to? In detail, what are their attitudes, their predispositions, their beliefs? This is huge. And then the last is that he realized that those who are winning presented arguments and ideas that were perceived reasonable. Logos, logical. Were your arguments reasonable? Did they make sense? Well, this very structure, if we want to just put a little pause in this history lesson and understand that every single day that we are negotiating, whether we are aware of it or not, those 3 elements are in play. You have an audience, and they are thinking certain things about you. You should be aware of who you are talking to and what they are thinking and what their belief structure is like, what their goals are like. In other words, who are you talking to? And at the end of the day, when it comes time to make your proposition, is your proposition reasonable? I hear offers being made every day that I just shake my head. You've got to be kidding. You want this seller to come into escrow and write a check for $100,000 to sell you his property? Great offer. Not reasonable. You're going to spend a lot of time and energy and effort finding 1 out of a billion who would even consider that. Those 3 elements are in play not only in your real estate investing world, but in life. There isn't a successful business out there that isn't aware of ethos, pathos, and logos. They spend billions of dollars, major companies, on those 3 things. How they look to their audience, who is their audience, and is what they're selling, what they're proposing, reasonable. Well, Aristotle had this nailed down, but then he took it a step further. He developed, or I should say, put structure to what he called a syllogism. Now, that's a big word, but broken down, it's very simply understood. He saw that there was a logical pattern to the way excellent orators and presenters were giving their ideas. And these ideas came in the form of a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. And that would sound something like this. I'll give you an example. All men are mortal. Now, this would be the major premise, okay? It's a statement of generality that everybody would agree on. All men are mortal. This isn't something you're going to have to argue. Of course, everybody knows that all men are mortal. Statement of generality. The next is the minor premise, which is a statement of specific application. Socrates is a man. Again, something that would be very difficult to argue with in its perfect form, but now we're getting specific, taking it out of the general into the specific. It leads to a very logical logos conclusion of, therefore, Socrates is mortal. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Now, how simple is that? Why do we need to know that? Well, what's interesting about that is that a syllogism is a structure that is based on science or math or fact. very simple, unarguable truths that lead to absolute and complete logical conclusions. What he found, though, was that great orators were taking the same structure and applying that same structure to values and beliefs, and therefore were able to move their audience without their audience even realizing they were making conclusions on their own. And he called this structure the enthymeme, a little bit more difficult word, but it would go something like this. All Boy Scouts are trustworthy. And he would perceive in his audience an attitude and a belief that he felt the great majority of that audience would believe that statement. I could speak to 100 groups in the country, and I could make the statement, I could assume, I should say, the statement that they would believe all Boy Scouts are trustworthy. Boy Scouts, of course, they're trustworthy. I don't need to tell them that. All I need to do is mention that I am a Boy Scout. And do you see what happens? They come to the conclusion all by themselves. Greg, therefore, is trustworthy. I'm working off a belief that I feel everybody would agree with, but I'm never going to state that. I'm simply inserting the minor premise. Greg is a Boy Scout. They provide the major premise, and they provide the conclusion. Aristotle noticed in these settings that the best of the best of the best were having their audience participate in their own persuasion. He wasn't having to lay things out in major premise, minor premise, conclusion form like a syllogism. He would take their attitude as the major premise. He would insert a statement in the minor premise category. They would provide their own conclusion. But do you see that it was his job to survey the audience and take note on what do I believe are the attitudes, predispositions, and beliefs of this audience? Therefore, my argument structure can live. All I need to do is make statements in the minor premise, and they provide the conclusions themselves. They don't even realize how they're agreeing with me because I'm not asking them to do anything. They're doing it themselves. Well, this structure, it's interesting. We can take this entire piece of history and run it forward and ask the question, what does this mean to us in our day in and day out negotiation? I think that throughout the rest of this presentation on negotiation, you will see that small little history lesson, ethos, pathos, logos, and the whole idea of this enthymeme, attitudes of major premise, minor premise, conclusion, and allowing your audience to come to those conclusions themselves based on you working with where they already are. You'll see how this comes into the rest of what we're talking about today. But again, understand that we are coming at negotiation from a higher level, and it takes getting involved with the seller. I think that the real estate industry has done a disservice in that it works very hard at keeping seller and buyer apart. And I can tell you that my version of real estate investing, I am face to face with sellers. Period. End of story. If I can't get face to face with the seller, how is it that I'm going to handcraft and structure a negotiation that works well with them and well with me? This idea of presenting an offer, having no knowledge at all of the seller, to some agent who then presents it to the seller and then brings it back to you, and then it's countered and countered again and recountered and countered again. That's ridiculous. I work out all of the details of my negotiations on a scratch paper with the seller, and only when we've worked out every last little detail do we then together transfer our agreement onto a purchase and sale agreement, and it simply moves towards closing. End of story. I can tell you that that very attitude makes my hunting for real estate very different than most people. Of the last 100 buildings I've bought, I can tell you that 2 of them were listed with real estate companies. And those 2 were the most brutal negotiations, the most difficult deals that I had in the last 100, simply because I could not get face-to-face with the seller. And if those weren't properties of passion that my wife decided we absolutely had to have, there's no way in the world I would have pursued them. For that very reason, that I am doing not only me as an investor a disservice, but the seller a disservice by not asking 100 questions and observing 100 things that allow me to handcraft the transaction in a way that makes sense for them and for me. Let me underline one huge point that I, at the start of this, want you to hear at least 3 times. My style of negotiation is not about changing anybody's mind. It's not about telling them that what they want, they shouldn't want, and let me show you a different cookie cutter. I am going to observe the direction of the boat that they are rowing. And I am simply going to put my proposition right into that boat, and we're going to go in that direction. That's the subtlety of negotiation. And you will see as we keep talking about this and start building this idea what I mean by that. At the very end of this CD series, you will hear that one more time. I row the boat the direction it's going. I'm not here trying to change anybody's mind. I'm simply trying to insert my proposition into a blanket of their attitudes, beliefs, goals, and structure. And they usually don't even know it has happened. You remember those things we used to have in junior high school? They were my favorite meal, by the way, especially with some good mustard. They called them pigs in a blanket. The little wiener hot dog in the middle of that very light roll that was probably really bad for you. But the proposition, you see, is the pig, and the pig is surrounded by this blanket. I'm needing to understand their blanket, and therefore my proposition will just be inside of that. They don't really even realize it. That's what we're talking about. And I want to start by talking about the preparation that goes into every negotiation. And if I could, I'd like to bore you with a story that sets up that entire topic. When you are, I'm a pilot, and when you learn to fly high-performance aircraft, especially in instrument conditions where you can't see outside of your airplane, you're in the fog, you're in the clouds, and you're moving along rather quickly. One thing you can't do while flying is pull off to the side of the road and sort of check your maps, or pull off to the side of the road and reevaluate where it is you are and figure out what you're doing. You're moving along at 200 knots and you can't see outside your plane. The one thing you learn is what they call stay ahead of the plane. In that you are moving quickly, you need to be thinking way ahead of where you're going. It's approaching quickly. What you need to be doing way in advance of your destination. A mile away from the airport isn't the time to check the weather at the airport and figure out if you happen to have the approach plate to land at that particular airport. Guess what? It's too late. In the 3 seconds you've just thought about it, you're already past the airport. The same idea applies to our negotiation. I have never met face-to-face with a seller where I didn't have a huge knowledge already of what they owned, where it was at, a rough idea of the value of that property, the zoning of that property, the lot size of that property, how long they have owned that property, what they paid for it, when, etc., etc., etc. All of that homework is an absolute requisite to any negotiation. Anything else I can find out about the seller and their situation and their motivations also is helpful prior to ever meeting with the seller. Let me give you an example. I got a call from a gentleman who had a small duplex in an area of Seattle where I invest. And he came across as very nonchalant, that he was just casually considering selling this particular duplex, and he'd had it a long time. And when I asked him a few questions over the phone about, who he was and how long he'd had it, and, basic questions like, what is this rent roll? He was very, I've got so many things going on in my life. I'm really not sure of that. And, I think it's, $500-600 a month aside. I'm really not sure. I'd have to check. Have you done any upgrades to the building? Well, I've just kind of done what's needed to be done. And, it's a good solid building. But I'm pretty hands off. But he was playing this very casual, very coy, very like he has no real issues or needs. Okay, so my research begins. I set up a meeting with this gentleman a few hours ahead of that time, which gives me enough time to pull some information on the property. And I actually drove by the property. Well, when I drove by the property, I got out. Now, I'm very courteous to not walk around the property too close because, he does have tenants there. Likely the tenants don't even know he's considering selling it. But so I'm standing outside the car and kind of in front of the neighbor's property. And this neighbor, who happened to be a very, very, very sharp 96-year-old lady. And I mean 96 going on 55. She was a firecracker and in great shape, sharp as a tack. And she came out on her front porch and just said, "Who are you?" And I said, my name's Greg, and I'm just looking at this little duplex next door to you. What are you looking at it for? I said, well, I'm considering purchasing it. I have a meeting with the seller here in a few hours, and I just thought I would take a quick look at it. Oh, you mean that scumbag Bob? That scumbag Bob's going to sell that property, huh? Oh, yeah, well, good luck dealing with him. Really? Is he kind of a tough guy to deal with? You see, now I start asking her a few leading questions, and I mean it took just a couple small questions, and oh boy, she was off to the races. Suffice it to say, I learned more about Bob, the tenant base, or I should say lack of tenant base, the fact that he hadn't received a rent check in 8 months from either tenant, that the tenants had him so scared and so threatened that he was freaking out, that they were threatening to shut the building down, call the city and condemn it, that they basically were living there rent-free in complete control and had Bob scared to death. And that, by the way, Bob's going to sound like this, but you know what? He's as motivated as anybody you've ever met to sell this building. And by the way, you'll likely never get these tenants out because they are professional losers and they know how to stay to the last day. Matter of fact, one of them is a self-proclaimed attorney. I went, really? All of this I learned in 5 minutes by talking with the neighbor, this sharp lady, prior to my meeting with the seller. Now, how valuable is that? You could run all of the title checks, all of the Metro scans, do your internet search on everything there is to know about that area and values and this and that. And none of that would be nearly as valuable as that 5 minutes with the neighbor. And so this, of course, teed up my negotiation with Bob. Knowledge is a requisite. Knowledge of the property, knowledge of the history, knowledge of the zoning, knowledge of the value, knowledge of the sold comps in the area, knowledge of the rent roll in the area. Every single part of that is a requisite before you ever meet with the seller. Think of the attorney world, if you will, just as another metaphor to what I'm talking about. Do you realize in any trial situation how much time and energy each side of the equation puts into researching all of the issues that surround the case? And if it's a particular one-on-one lawsuit, all of the issues that surround that person? Most of the questions that a prosecuting attorney will ask in the initial part of any trial, most every one of those questions, he already knows the answer to. They're truly rhetorical questions. But he's simply fishing to see, first, are you going to tell the truth? Second of all, how are you going to present this? Because if you don't present it correctly, I'm going to pull your pants down right in front of everybody and let them know the real facts here. All that research prior to any questions. Most of the initial questions I ask a seller about the property itself, I already know the answers to. I'm wanting to kind of get their feel on it. For example, I may ask them, do you have an idea of what the tax assessed value is on this property? Well, if they immediately tell me off the top of their head, oh, absolutely. It's a joke. I can't believe it's assessed so high. It's tax assessed at $300,000. That's ridiculous. I can't believe they think it's worth that much. Now, doesn't that tell me something about their attitude around value and price? Versus if they said, yeah, I think it's tax assessed at $300,000, but everybody in the world knows that that's ridiculously low. The real value is way more than that. That gives me an entirely different impression. Or maybe a third response is, I have no idea. I don't pay attention to that stuff. All I know is I paid $100,000 for it 25 years ago, and that's really all I know. Do you see that I'm doing a little interview there? Although I know the answer of tax assessed value, what I'm fishing for is their attitude around that very topic. And with that, I know a lot more about them, not just the property, you see. Okay, so this whole idea of being educated going in to any negotiation is critical. Understanding the zoning is critical. If you're buying a single-family home that is zoned multiplex, well, that's an entire equation in and of itself. You need to know that going in. Is there more value in the land or the structure? If their rent roll is $5,000 a month, but you realize that on this 10-plex, that rent roll should be $9,000 a month, that's valuable information going in. And that means you have to know your comparables in the area before you ever meet with this particular seller. Okay, so that whole idea of setting up your time with the seller. Now, let's talk about actually meeting with the seller. Do you remember ethos, the first part of the equation, Aristotle? The saying, I think, goes that you never have another time to make a first impression. Once it's done, it's done. And so this whole idea of at this meeting, we're going to be on time, maybe even a couple minutes early. This says so much right out of the chute, especially if in your hopeful negotiation, you're going to try to involve the seller in some of the financing where you're actually going to be paying them on a monthly basis. If you're 20 minutes late for the meeting, do they have a lot of confidence to think that you're going to be on time with your payment? You see? 2 minutes early, this guy likely will be on time with his payment. The kind of clothes you wear. Really interesting that just over the phone, you are going to be picking up on some things about the seller. And if you're meeting Billy Bob, who's been a trucker his whole life, to show you this property, are you going to wear your Hugo Boss suit and show up in a Mercedes 500 SL? No. Little overpowering for Billy Bob. Always clean, always tidy, but trying to match who you're speaking with. Now, if I'm meeting someone who owns this building that's an attorney for one of the largest partners in Seattle, I likely will be dressed very nice, maybe in a sport coat shirt, not overdressed, but certainly not in my jeans and golf shirt. And yet if I'm meeting Billy Bob, I may be in my jeans and golf shirt, right? I may drive my truck if I meet Billy Bob. I may drive a Mercedes if I'm meeting the attorney. These sorts of awarenesses start your negotiation. The other thing that I do every time I meet a seller is I leave my watch in the car. Why? My time frame is their time frame. They are the ones that are going to dictate when this meeting is over. Why do I say that? Well, sometimes a seller needs to have time to feel you out, to check for your sincerity. And they are going to dictate the topic of conversation. I think back on so many stories that it makes me just laugh to think about how many times I have sat down with someone who had a property that I wanted, and they start running in a direction that you realize you've just got to hang in there. I remember one particular seller that I went to meet, and as soon as I walked in the door, here are these several, I can't remember how many, 5 or 6, of these very long-haired cats. And throughout the living room of this particular residence were just pictures of cats everywhere and ribbons on the wall of cats. And of course, I had to say something around, wow, these are sure beautiful cats. Well, you also need to know that as a long-term landlord, I'm not particularly fond of cats. It's just never been a part of my family, and I don't have a lot of cats. I don't mind cats, but it's not my pet of choice. Well, it was her pet of choice. So all of a sudden, I, of course, love and am extremely interested in these wonderful creatures. Oh, let me show you, she said. Let's sit down right here on the couch. Now, this is one of those couches that eats you for lunch when you sit down. You know, you sit in it and you feel your feet come off the floor and you're sinking into a deep V position, realizing that you're going to need help to get up. It's one of those couches. And it's also of a fabric that every long cat hair that ever was clinging to this couch. And I really didn't want to even sit down there, but of course you do. And she breaks out the picture books of Fluffy in his first cat show in 1968. And then we went through 1968 to 1988, every year, every cat show, every ribbon around Fluffy's neck. And it went on and on and on and on. And of course, I'm trying to just stay so focused and interested to say, now, after 88, what did Fluffy do from there? Don't you have 89? And, oh, I do somewhere. I'll be right back. Just wait here. You don't mind if they sit on your lap, do you? Oh, no, they're so beautiful. So now I have 3 cats sitting on my lap everywhere. And I think cats sense that if you really don't like cats, they make it painful for you. They really like you if you don't like them. So they're rubbing up against me and they're purring and they're sitting on my lap, and my black pants and black sweater is absolutely covered. And we continue to go through cat story after cat story after cat story. Hours of this. And all of a sudden, like a bell went off. This lady goes, oh gosh, I've almost forgot. You were here because you wanted to buy my home. Well, here's what I want. I would like $120,000. I really don't need a lot of cash. I would take $5,000 down and the balance on a note. 5 or 6% interest would work well with me. And can you close in a couple weeks? I couldn't believe it. But the reason that happened was because I paid my dues. I was sincere. And I hung in there. Even in a topic that I had very little interest in, that particular seller never knew that I had very little interest in it. She thought that I wanted the latest offspring of Fluffy the cat for my very own. I was so into it. Well, on this same topic of where you meet sellers, I've heard many speakers out there say it doesn't really matter where you meet them. Denny's, there, here, doesn't matter. Here's our offer. This is our cookie cutter. Present it to them. Send it in the mail. You don't even really need to meet them. I can't tell you how offended I am by that statement. From the standpoint of negotiations that pay, I will always meet the seller in their own residence. Aristotle said that it's our job to discover all available means of persuasion, all available means of agreement. And in someone's own home, in their own space, I am privy to every clue about who they are, what they value, what they want, where they've been, All of those clues are at my disposal. Usually, I could write a 4-page paper on a seller within 5 minutes of standing in their living room. Therefore, I'm always going to want to negotiate with the seller in their own space. And in their own space, a lot of interesting things can happen. Again, I'm privy to off-ramps, as I call them, to the main track of why we're there. We're there to talk about the real estate. We're there to talk about their ideas around selling, what they want to do, where they want to go. But sitting in the corner of the living room or a bag with wonderful golf clubs in it, guess what? That's an off-ramp. I'm going to say, I see that you're a golfer. Oh, absolutely, I'm a golfer. Where do you normally golf? Where do you golf? Who do you golf with? What's your best score? What's your handicap? Etc., etc. I'm going to go there as long as they'll allow me, because this establishes our relationship. Great negotiations come out of relationships. I'm asking people in my end version to do things that require a certain amount of trust. And trust is not something people give without feeling that they have a connection to you. Therefore, these off-ramps that I'm looking for, pictures of their children, pictures of their grandchildren. Oh, beautiful children. Now, how old are they now? And who's the oldest? And are they all about the same? And, which one did this? Which one did that? And where are they going to school now? And anything I can find at my disposal to take the discussion away from real estate, to develop that relationship, that's what I'm trying to do. And all the while, I am collecting puzzle pieces. How difficult is a puzzle to solve? Picture a 500-piece puzzle where the picture is all face down on the table. So now all you have to figure this out are just the shapes. No picture. My version of negotiation starts there. But once I'm in their space, once I start doing my research, once I'm face to face, I start flipping puzzle pieces over to show the picture that the puzzle represents. Now it's a much easier equation to solve. I may walk up to the front door, and there right on the window, right next to the front door, is Local 424 Carpentry Union, and proud of it. Right? That tells me something about the seller. It might have a sticker, USMC, looking for a few good men on the car. Oh, okay. So this gentleman was in the Marine Corps. That tells me something of his attitudes and beliefs, who he is. I remember once driving up and I hear the license plate for this particular person. It was a license plate that represented the military academy at West Point and the year that this person graduated. Do I need to go into a discussion of what honor means to this person? What integrity means? I can assume that that's pretty high on their list. The topic of honor and integrity if this person graduated from West Point. I collect these puzzle pieces. And then from there, my propositions are going to be in the direction that they are already going. They're already believing. I may say to that person who was a West Point graduate in my negotiations that, we live in a world where oftentimes people don't do what they say they will do. And I perceive you as somebody who is a person of their word, who actually values the idea around do what you say you're going to do. Well, did he ever tell me that that's who he was? No, but I saw his license plate. I can take that bit of information and I can assume that the boat is being rowed in that direction. And I can use his own attitudes to help my cause in negotiation, because now my on-ramp is simply going to join that freeway and go in that direction. I'm going to take what's already there and run with it.
This is the end of Disc 1. Negotiations That Pay with Greg Pineo continues on Disc 2.